For those of you who don't know me, I'm Annabelle Munson. I'm your host and moderator. It's good to see so many new faces and, of course, all of my returning guests. Clearly, our focus today is on helping you get those trips moving, especially for Europe, and the response has been significant. A lot of the questions we received in advance were around this topic. So you may have actually seen in the news media lately some travel blogs recurring to that message of pent-up demand. We're definitely seeing that trend here at Universal based on the inquiries about trips and the interest. Positive news to say the least. So I'm testing out a theme. I want to see what you think of it. Revenge travel. How do we feel about this? Let me know what you think. I'm actually planning for Universal's attendance at EBAA that's coming up, the MBA base program. That's going to be a live event coming up in October, our first trade show that we'll be back at. So I'm looking at creating some commemorative gear. So if you like this theme, let me know, because I might be able to incorporate some new promo items into the mix. So cheers and welcome. All right, let's get on to the main event, our agenda and speakers for today. I want to welcome back Christine Van Backus, our Senior Account Manager and COVID Ops expert, providing her always popular and on-demand global regional review, including the latest on restrictions, vaccine-enabled access, and even some welcome news on high-traffic events. We haven't heard a lot about those lately, but we do have some. Adam Hartley with our Global Regulatory Services team will provide what's new for the US, Canada, and Mexico, especially on the regulatory front. Next, we're going to dive into those practical operational insights we promised for accessing those much anticipated European summer destinations. We're going to start with Gonzalo Barona Jr., our operations manager with Universal Aviation Spain. Dimitra Kirikopoulou, Director Operations and Customer Care for Universal Aviation Greece. Andreas Bracha, Operations Manager for Universal Aviation Italy. They will each share specific details for travel planning into their countries and the surrounding region, including especially what services are available and how to set expectations for crew and passenger on what the experience is going to be upon arrival and on the ground. And then we're going to wrap up our planned programming with our special guest, Juergen Wiese, Chairman of the European Business Aviation Association, on what to expect for business aviation travel in Europe for the second half of 2021 and really looking ahead into 2022, both COVID-related and otherwise. We'll close out the day with your questions, as usual. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we are, as always, starting with Christine. So let's put you on spotlight so they can see you. Anything new to report for the Caribbean and those island destinations, Christine?
So for the Caribbean, we have a few. The first and foremost is St. Bart's. So of course, entry is still restricted for essential purposes, and you have to show documentation for that. But for US persons that are vaccinated, they can gain entry via their accommodations. So this means that when they book their hotel or their villa, that accommodation will in turn communicate with the government to grant them entry into the country. Then we have Grenada. As of May 1st, they have updated their vaccination entry requirements. Those persons that have been vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed since their last dose can enter the country quarantine-free. Of course, they will need to take a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival. They will need to take another test upon arrival and then quarantine in their hotel until those results are known. And this can take up to 48 hours to do. Then we have the Bahamas. As of May 1st, they have updated their entry requirements. Those persons that are vaccinated can now forego the PCR testing. What this means is that for the online travel health visa, instead of uploading PCR testing requirements, they will upload their vaccination results. Note that 2 weeks, of course, must have passed since their last dose, and those persons that are not vaccinated still continue with their same process. And then we have Barbados. As of May 8th, they have updated their entry requirements too. Those persons that have been vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed since their last dose can get a PCR test, and I think it's 3 days prior to arrival, take another one upon entry, and then quarantine at their hotel until those results are known. And that's usually between 24 and 48 hours.
Got it. All right, what about Central and South America?
For both of these regions, things have remained relatively stable, so there's nothing to report there.
All right, then let's get back into Europe. We are going to get a lot into some details for some specific locations based on our panelists that we have on board with us. But can you give us the latest on the rest of Europe?
Sure. So first we have Cyprus. As of May 10th, US persons that are vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed since their last dose may enter the country quarantine-free. All they have to do is upload their vaccination information through the Cyprus Flight Pass profile. Then we have Bulgaria. As of May 1st, they are permitting U.S. vaccinated persons to enter the country. Prior to entry, they need to make sure that 2 weeks have passed since their last dose. They need to ensure that they get a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival or an antigen test 48 hours prior to arrival. Then we have France. France has stipulated a schedule currently and for the next few weeks. A lot of those changes are on the domestic level, but based on their latest schedule, U.S. tourists will be able to enter the country on June 9th. They have stated that they need a sanitary passport to enter the country. I presume that this is going to be the vaccination certificate with 2 weeks passing since their last dose and a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival, and then they will be able to move about freely within the country. So we're going to have to wait and see when those regulations are actually issued. And then we have the UK. The UK has some major changes coming May 17th. They are moving to a color-coordinated entry system with green, amber, and red. Of course, for the people on the red list, if they've been there in the preceding 10 days, they may not enter the country. People on the amber list, which the US is currently on that list, continue the process of entry, which is currently at hand. That means a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival, fill out the PLF form, book your day 2 and day 8 PCR testing while in country. And of course, you need to quarantine for 10 days. There's an at-home COVID exempt scheme that's in place that people can apply for in advance. Well, that means that you have to quarantine for a full 5 days. And after that day has transpired, you may take that COVID test in order to get out of that quarantine. And then people on the green list, if they've been there in the preceding 10 days, just need to take their PCR test, fill out the PLF form, and then they are quarantine free. A few items to note here is that the UK will be reviewing the list of each country, of each color coordinated system every 3 weeks for additions. However, removals may be at short notice. So if the US gets on the list, the next time they'll be reviewing it is May 28th, then they would follow that green process. But people that are removed from that listing can be at short notice, so they need to keep a close eye on things.
Wow, you weren't kidding. There were a lot of Europe updates. All right. What about Middle East and Africa?
So for Middle East and Africa, the only location I have to mention here is Bahrain. For European and US persons that are vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed since their last dose, may enter the country quarantine free. The only stipulation here is that they have to show their proof in advance. Upon arrival, they will take a PCR test, and then they will quarantine until those results are known. Also, depending on the length of stay in the country, they will need to take a PCR test while in country on day 5 and day 10.
Got it. All right, so let's round out with a look at the Asia Pacific region. I understand there's more news here to report than we've seen for a while as well.
Yes. So for Thailand, people that are looking to enter the country, of course, it's open. Regardless of nationality and vaccine status, they will have to quarantine for 14 days. You cannot omit this, of course, unless there's a diplomatic clearance to consider here. These regulations are in place until May 31st, so we'll have to see what happens after that. For Sri Lanka is open to tourists, but they just revoked the vaccine entry status. So what this means is that when you come into the country, you will have to take a PCR test to enter. You have to stay at a level 1 hotel you have to book it for 14 days. When you're staying at these hotels, you can use all the amenities and you can go to specific tourist sites that are approved in what they refer to as the bio bubble. Also, you will be taking PCR tests while in country, and the number of tests also depends on the length of stay. And then we have the French Polynesia. As of May 1st, they did open to US persons and persons in general residing in the US in the last 30 days that are vaccinated. That means that 2 weeks must have passed since their last dose. They have to do a PCR test prior to arrival. They need to complete the online EDIS form where they will upload their vaccination certificate. They will take an antigen test upon arrival, and then they will be given self-test kits while on the islands. Then we have the Maldives. People that have been vaccinated can enter the country. Of course, they need to get a PCR test 96 hours prior to arrival, and then they may move about the country freely. This may change because their numbers have been going up, so we're going to have to look at that closely if you have a trip there. And last but not least is the Philippines. The Philippines is again permitting foreign nationals into the country. Of course, you have to make sure that your visa arrangements are taken or in place, and they've changed the entry requirements, and these are a bit unique. You don't need a PCR test prior to arrival, but they do require that you book a quarantine-approved hotel for 7 days, and then you will take a PCR test on day 6. So those regulations are until further notice.
All right, thanks for all of that. Now, on to everyone's absolute favorite update of the day, and you've already been touching on these. Where are we at with COVID vaccine-enabled access? Vaccine cards or so-called vaccine passports, both for individual countries and any emerging universal standards.
So what we're seeing here is that each country is enacting their own regulations for the most part. We're seeing the trends either go the route of you just show your vaccination certificate, or they require vaccination certificate and additional testing prior to arrival or upon arrival. So it's kind of a 50-50 right now, and I presume that this is going to continue as is. As far as vaccine passports, some countries are still discussing it. The EU is still finalizing the EU Digital Green Pass, which shows the entry requirements for the European Union. Of course, when they pass it, it will still have to be approved by each country, and they may modify it based on their needs. And then, of course, we have platforms like the IATA platform, which allows you to update it and have your passport or vaccination certificate data there. The problem is that for this platform, the GA community was not considered, so nobody has access to the data that's in there.
Got it. And before I let you go, Christine, any more insights into the major events you've been watching?
So the G7 will be taking place in June in the UK. So that's coming up in the next few weeks. After that, we have the World Economic Forum, still slated to take place in August, but authorities have yet to announce those regulations. So we're still standing by for that. And then we have the Olympics. So Civil Aviation and the IOC have agreed that they would like to see VIPs submit their requests. So what they want you to do is have your schedule. If you're one of the VIPs are large sponsors. Some of the athletes' teams may be considered on that, the IOC committee and diplomatic and state level flights. So you submit your schedule with the dates and times that you want. And that way, in essence, you're applying for parking and slots. So Civil Aviation will be gathering all these entries and reviewing them. And then they will make a decision if they will permit these VIPs to enter for the games coming up.
Got it. All right. Thanks so much, Christine. All right, so I have a confession to make. I got so excited about my revenge travel imagery that I forgot something super important. Chat. If you have questions, please put these into the chat area, but I am going to ask a favor. If you can, save those, and I know some of you have already been putting them in, so we'll hold on to them. But if you can hold on to as many of your questions as possible until we get through the bulk of the presentation, that will help you and us, because you may get your question answered, and there'll be a few less for Lewis to keep track of. And so Lewis is in the background keeping us on track in the chat area, and I appreciate his help with the Q&A when we get there. So apologize for that disruption, but let's get back to the agenda then. And that means Adam. So I'd like to turn now to our favorite source for all things North America, especially and regulatory. So Adam Hartley. So welcome back. Let's get you on Spotlight. Adam, can you get us started with Mexico updates?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Annabelle. Really excited to be here again. Mexico is still pretty unrestricted, no testing requirements prior to arrival. You do have a potential health screen on arrival, but no curfews, no quarantines. And we heard Christine talking about the new color system in the UK. There is a color system in Mexico, and currently no states, 0 states are in red status at this time.
Got it. Okay, anything new for Canada?
Canada is like the opposite. So nothing really new per se, but Canada still remains highly restricted, mandatory quarantines on arrival at government hotels, government accommodations, even for Canadian citizens in many scenarios. So you still have to have your quarantine plan after you break from government quarantine, and then of course limited mobility and services available in Canada once you're free to move around.
Got it. I understand you have some news about changes in the U.S. That may impact a lot of our guests.
Yeah, so lots of moving parts for the USA as usual. Of course, the new presidential proclamation, we've added India to the list with the new outbreaks of COVID-19 in India. India is now a restricted or suspended region for presidential proclamations. to add to our list, which means if you've been in India in the past 14 days, you are suspended unless you have one of the exempt visa types, are an American citizen, or apply for a national interest waiver. What I would say about the new suspensions is, as we are seeing more restriction based on COVID, we're also seeing a move from regulatory and industry together to try to solve some of our common issues that have been created by these suspensions. One is additional visa exemptions, so we can post some of that. That includes work visas, diversity visas, some things that had been banned, but are now open as just flat exemptions. The other big development on the suspension or access front is NIW eligibility, so national interest waivers. Your private crew, your B1, B2 crew, who need to come to the U.S. for things like training, things like aircraft delivery, maintenance, all sorts of different needs, but not as active air crew, have been suspended and have been facing some really big challenges. So now they are eligible, aviation personnel are eligible to apply for a national interest waiver. So it is not an exemption, but you can apply for a national interest waiver to say, hey, I need to come to flight safety in Dallas in 2 weeks. Here's my confirmation letter, all those things. And that can actually be reviewed and approved. So some new pathways are opening up for us, and that's really positive. Other news that's out there, the CDC responded to industry. So something we've been pushing very hard on in regards to PCR testing. PCR test is still required before coming to the United States 3 days prior or within 3 days prior. But they've expanded the acceptance of home tests. So there are some guidelines around what home tests are accepted. So not every home test is accepted. It has to have a connection to a lab, a connection to a support facility, if not a lab, with the test. But that is good news and gives us, again, more flexibility as an industry for our crew, our travelers to get that done, or not our crew, but our travelers to get that done. Also, last update, CBP has released what they call a private arrival guidance document. So if you're receiving a U.S. Customs confirmation from Universal or a U.S. Customs confirmation direct from CBP now via the system, you'll receive a PDF document that is essentially, they don't like the rule or terms and conditions, but a guidance document that plays out the more common inconsistencies that we see, or the more common issues that we see with travelers interacting with customs, or support interacting with customs, either in the landing rights process or in the actual transaction with CBP. So that is a living document. You're already receiving it on your customs confirmations from Universal. So if you have any questions on that, you can certainly reach out.
Got it. And Adam, one or two quick learnings from all those regulatory reviews you've been doing lately? Anything to share?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of opportunity out there. This move as an industry to revenge travel, getting back out and moving abroad. You just want to make sure that you have maximum flexibility. We're doing these GRS profile reviews, talking about things like visa waiver program, STEP enrollment as a resource, all those things. So really great conversations, and be glad to have them with anybody.
All right. Thanks so much, Adam, as always. We're going to move now to our European summer review. For the benefit of all of our guests, let me set the stage quickly. We've asked our Universal Aviation representatives to walk us through a key set of questions about each of these specific regions. So that's Spain, Greece, and Italy in this case, along with some other Mediterranean locations. The goal here is to give you essential operating information that you're going to need to consider as you get back into these regions, and especially crew and passenger experience factors. I'll be asking, therefore, kind of the same questions for each of our UA representatives. Hopefully the goal here, you come away with a checklist as well as best practices to get started. I really need to point out as well that we're extremely fortunate to have this group of people from Universal Aviation joining us. They come to us, all of them, with many, many years of experience, each of them not only longtime veterans of Universal Aviation, but of general aviation overall. They've seen a lot in their collective years, and it's going to be really helpful as we get back into Europe this season. So with that, I'm going to start with our Universal Aviation offices in Spain with insights from Gonzalo. So welcome to Gonzalo. It's our first time joining us in the webinar. What's the latest outlook for Spain to welcome tourist travel this summer?
Thank you, Annabelle. Hello, everyone. Well, on the 9th of May, many restrictions were removed for Schengen travelers who are now able to come freely to Spain as long as they bring a negative PCR test. For the rest, we're still not open for leisure travel, just allow if force majeure or business purpose, which has been approved by police border control. We expect Spain to start reopen for tourism later this summer, June, July, more or less, as more of the local population is vaccinated. We do know the government does not want to lose another summer travel season as we rely on tourism. So it's working hard to make the country ready to reopen. But as of now, we're still waiting on an official schedule. We're hopeful that we'll know more in the coming weeks.
Makes sense. And let's hope as well. COVID-19 related restrictions and requirements. What do you think they're going to look like for leisure travelers when we get there for both passengers and crew?
Well, we can expect all passengers will require negative PCR tests performed in the last 72 hours, while crews are exempt for this test in the peninsula. But if planning to travel into the islands, like the Balearic Islands or Canary Islands, then they will require to have a negative PCR test if they plan to overnight. For technical stops, the test not required as long as everyone stays on board. Please also take note when crews are exempt for the test is because they enter and they exit the country as crew. If they plan to enter or exit on airlines because there's been a crew change, for example, then they will be treated as passengers and they will be required to have a PCR test.
Got it. Good reminder. For general aviation, what do you think the biggest challenges are going to be for travel into your region?
Well, we're expecting a big increase in traffic, which could mean a lack of parking in many locations. And also remember, those non-Schengen travelers will depend on police border control authorization that currently is required in advance. So as we always say, try to plan ahead.
Absolutely. So based on the information you have right now, which I know is not complete, but it is what we're working with, what do you expect the on-the-ground experience to be like?
Well, on the ground, there has been a change. Recently, national curfew and lockdown rules have been transitioned from the central government to the local leaders or majors, with each tailoring their own city rules based on current infections number. So the rules vary widely from city to city. We expect all hotels, restaurants, venues, etc., work as normal, but with certain restrictions, as on how much people can be seated together, depending on if it's table indoors, outdoors, etc. This means many of these locations have reduced capacity, so plan ahead, highly recommended. I guarantee we're all making great efforts to guarantee a safe environment on every aspect.
Oh, great. Thank you. And how specifically is the Universal Aviation team in Spain preparing for this uptick in travel?
Well, we're glad to see the volume is coming up. So as we see this increase in volume, we're reinstating all our workers, but after taking safety and operational refresh courses to make sure we're all ready to give an outstanding service.
Thank you. And any last pieces of advice, anything to avoid or a great piece of good advice to offer to our operators?
Well, as I always say, please don't hesitate in asking our ops or myself any questions you might have. We're here to help and assist. We strongly recommend to plan ahead. Gather and send all GenDec information, proposal trip if necessary, QR sanitary government codes, negative PCR test if the operation is happening in less than 72 hours. The more information you can provide ahead, the better. That way we can secure and confirm all possible services, and then so can you.
Good. Very good advice. Thank you so much, Gonzalo. Now I'm going to move from Gonzalo to Dimitra, representing our Universal Aviation Greece office. Welcome, Dimitra. She is also a first-time guest. So good to have you. And let's get started. What's the latest outlook for Greece to welcome international and regional leisure travelers this summer?
First of all, thank you for having me here with you. Hello, everybody. So Greece has officially announced its opening to leisure on May the 14th, which is this Friday. But unfortunately, as it has been happening throughout this whole COVID-19 period, conditions are not officially announced till last minute. Since we are on a trial opening period these past 2 weeks, I would guess that procedures would remain more or less the same as they currently are.
Understood. And so speaking of restrictions, just like we did with Gonzalo, what do you foresee the COVID-19 specific impact being for passengers and crew when they start to arrive?
Passengers must hold either a negative PCR test of the last 72 hours or a vaccination certificate with the whole process completed at least 14 days prior to their arrival. Passenger locator poll will remain mandatory for the arrival. And we should consider that we're still close to some nationalities. And even though we expect new entries on the approved list the next couple of weeks, I would ask everybody to consult with our ops before setting up their plan to make sure that their passengers will be admissible into Greece. Now, as far as crew members are concerned, officially, they are not restricted at all, but unfortunately, last summer we saw some cases where the authorities, mainly in some small remote airports where the aircraft lay over for long-term parking, requested tests from crew members or had them tested upon their arrival. Mainly, this was because out of concern, because they would stay there for a long time and they would mingle with the locals. I know that most operators now have their own internal policies, and crew members are often tested, or even better, they are vaccinated. So if you have something like that, be my guest, show it, and get over with that. Otherwise, our universal aviation agent on spot or our operation will be there to assist you.
Excellent. And then along with that, what do you foresee as some of the biggest challenges in general for general aviation into your region?
Challenges remain the same as the previous years. Limited slots on the popular destinations like Mykonos, Zakynthos, Heraklion, and of course, long-term parking restrictions. Though if crew members are flexible on where to lay over, we have options for parking like Samos, Kos, Sithia in Crete, and many more. And since we're talking about Greece, all these locations are roughly 30-40 minutes flight time away from the popular destination where their passengers reside. But please do pay attention to the limitation of the airport operating hours.
Excellent reminder. For charter operators in particular, do they need to worry about cabotage restrictions?
Yes, non-European charter operators need an annual permit in order to operate charter flights into Greece. Prior notice required would be roughly a week for CAA to review all documents and issue the permit. Once this permit is on hand, then they are allowed to operate only international flights. Domestic legs within Greece are considered cabotage and are allowed only to European Union operators. It doesn't matter if you carried those passengers into Greece a couple of days ago, still domestic legs are prohibited and are subject to heavy fines and possible future bans if it happens repeatedly.
Understood. So based on the information you have now, what do you expect the on-the-ground experience to be like?
Judging on the really impressive increase on inquiries and handling requests started to come in the past couple of weeks, it looks like it will be a busy season. And despite the fact that handling-wise, all services are available, same as pre-COVID, ATC delays should be expected, which will be mixing up flight schedules and sometimes causing unavoidable delays on the ground, especially when we're talking about really small and busy airports and communities like Mykonos, where the whole island operates on almost 100% of its capacity on all aspects, ground transfer, catering, hotel, whatever. Now, as far as life outside of the airport is concerned, restaurant, bars, shops, marinas, they are all currently regrouping. Still recently they were closed or partially operating, but looks like they will be available and ready to support the needs of their guests, with restrictions though that will make it necessary to make arrangements in advance, and would also call for your patience.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, Dimitra, how are you and your team at Universal Aviation Greece getting ready for this shift? It's going to be a change.
We have already hired and trained new staff since the COVID-19 period has significantly increased the workload of our ops. And since we are on the topic, I am very, very, very happy to announce that since last Friday, May the 7th, Universal Aviation Greece has now its own staff at Mykonos Airport. Since the complexity of the business aviation operation increased in the past few years, and especially after COVID-19 burst out, affecting both our personal and business life, we decided that it was about time to take a step further and expand to Mykonos. Till now, our operation office in Athens was dealing with permit slot services, setting up everything, and we had local agents there, meeting the passengers and the aircraft, acting as a representative. But now we have our own people. They are providing also over-the-wing services. They are dealing with the PPR. They are solving all issues on the spot. I believe it will be a very nice year for Universal in Mykonos.
Excellent. Always good to hear about additional resources. Thank you. All right. And as we close off, Dimitra, is there one piece of advice you'd like to give operators, as well as anything they should avoid?
I would not recommend to avoid something in particular, but I would strongly encourage everybody to consult with our ops on all items, even the minors one. I've seen operators paying large amount of money on hotel cancellation fees just because they didn't really consider the restrictions and parking problems, airport operating hours, issues that they would have avoided if they just called our office. We are there. Now, as far as the good advice, I won't be making the difference of that also. My tip is to plan ahead. Last minute trips on the peak of the season at popular destinations may be left out or may be fully unable to be served, especially due to lack of slots. There is a 14 days window to apply for slot. Please take advantage.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dimitra. Lots of great news coming out of Greece. And now we're going to move to Andrea. Let's welcome back Andrea. He joined us in April for those of you who were able to be with us for that event. He's with Universal Aviation Italy and obviously oversees other Mediterranean operations. So he graciously gave us a preview in April, and he's back to give us a little more information plus some specifics on Italy. So welcome, Andrea. What updates do you have for access across the Mediterranean?
Hello to everyone. Since last webinar held, things have positively changed. Many countries in the Mediterranean area have now eased or will soon ease restrictions. More in-depth examples, Croatia is now accepting tourists with proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test or a certificate that states the recovery from COVID-19. Montenegro and Slovenia have already opened the borders for vaccinated tourists, and Turkey is accepting tourists with negative PCR tests. To note that there are still restrictions for people who visited India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, South Africa, and Brazil, so operations should be evaluated case by case.
Excellent. And now turning to your home base of Italy in particular, what's the latest outlook for Italy to welcome regional international leisure travel? Good
news. Italy plans to allow visitors from mid-May onwards, so in a few days, without having to quarantine upon arrival, who can show that they are negative, vaccinated, or immune. This would apply not just to EU nationals, but also to non-EU nationals. These new entry rules would not apply to countries on Italy's blacklist, which currently includes arrivals from Brazil and India. I'm sure the news will be welcomed by tourists longing to travel to Italy. Our mountains, beaches, cities, and countryside are reopening, and this process will speed up in the coming weeks and months.
Excellent. Well, Italy's definitely on my list. I don't know how soon, but it's definitely there. So I can empathize. So what are the expected COVID-19 related restrictions and requirements for those leisure travelers and the crew facilitating them?
Well, passengers, as long as they can show that they have been vaccinated or test negative or have immunity, then they'll be welcome to come to Italy and are free to move between Italian regions. Crew operating flights have almost always been and will continue to be exempt from restrictions. Currently, there are restrictions in place, as said before, only coming from Brazil, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka.
All right. And then as far as general aviation overall, I know I asked this of you in April, but now with a little more information, what do you see as any changes in the big challenges being faced for travel into the region?
We expect traffic to strongly increase, especially in major tourist locations such as Milan for shopping, Rome for cultural attractions, and of course, Venice, Naples, Olbia. Apart from COVID restrictions, a challenge could be shortage of parking spots and less parking options. Small airports usually used to reposition the aircrafts may still struggle to recover. But there is no need to worry because Milan and Rome are the best option as repositioning airports and have a dedicated general aviation facility. Another challenge could be the connection between aircraft, helicopter, and yacht, as there are many stakeholders involved, but it's still absolutely feasible. As you can see, we always have the proper solution to succeed in the mission.
Andrea, you have my absolute confidence in this. All right, so moving on. So based on the information available, can you give us some insight into the on-the-ground experience that can be expected?
Most of airports have returned to normal operations, especially the biggest, but we recommend to use a reliable service provider to avoid any issue. A good coordination and a local experienced supervisory representative, such as Universal Aviation Italy with more than 35 years in the field, will grant operation is done properly. We suggest to plan well ahead and we'll be happy to support on services arrangement to crew, aircraft, catering, transportation, whatever. Life on the ground is becoming much more interesting. Hotels, restaurants, museums, shopping districts are reopening. And also events in presence have been planned, such as the Furniture Fair and the Formula One Grand Prix in Milan in September.
Excellent. And I think Andrea brings up a really good point. Is that one thing, as we return to these trips, which are so anticipated, but definitely use the service providers that you trust and get lean on them as much as possible. We've seen that theme throughout, and everything is a little more complicated now. So just always remember, not only plan ahead, but use the resources at your disposal. So how are your team, you and your team in UA Italy, preparing for the increase in demand?
Our staff has completed all refresher training. We are fully ready to provide all above and below the wing services. In all this complexity of rules and potential issues, we are happy to be a point of reference for solutions and answers to questions. Contacting us, you will receive the most updated country's valuable information for you and for your passenger safety.
Got it. Thank you. And so any last piece of advice or anything to avoid?
Avoid any kind of hesitation in communicating to your reliable coordinator any last-minute change or tentative schedule. The advice is always the same: plan ahead. High season is from mid-June till the end of September, so now is the moment to start planning.
Understood. Thank you so much, Andrea. Now, I want to shift our attention, continuing in the European theme, to our final guest, Juergen, the chairman of EBAA. Is a seasoned industry advocate, a senior member of the BMW flight department, and an active GA pilot. So welcome, Juergen. So good to have you with us. And I know you've prepared a couple of updates for us across a range of topics impacting all of our operators.
Thank you, Annabelle. I'll fill in the rest of the hour. Okay. No. Thanks, everyone. And hello, everyone from the European Business Aviation Association. It's great to see a couple familiar faces here on my first page of the gallery. Hi, Jonathan, Rick, Scott. Great. Give me some courage doing that here. It's a pleasure also to be here. And also thank you to Universal Weather and Aviation for taking or demonstrating leadership in business aviation through hosting these webinars. So under normal circumstances, a little bit of advertisement, we would have been busy at EBAA in preparing EBACE, which around this hour on a Wednesday of next week in the evening hours would be in full swing. Obviously, it's not. And we had to cancel together with NBAA, our partner in that event, we had to decide to cancel the event. Instead, we will host a series of very exciting educational webinars called eBACE Connect next week from Tuesday to Thursday, May 18th to May 20th. And I think there's a link already shown in the chat. So it will be business leaders, government officials, flight department personnel, manufacturers, all kinds of people from business aviation who will discuss how the business aviation market in Europe will be moving beyond COVID, the latest trends in sustainability, related technology, and how companies are ensuring safety for cutting-edge aircraft. So back from the advertisement, I like to touch 3 blocks of topics today. So first, I'd like to sketch a picture from the general ability to travel to and within Europe to the conditions under which you can expect to conduct operations, down to, and I think that's most important in my presentation here, to the spotlight, put a spotlight on a few topics which may have been hidden under the current, let's say, in aviation language, pilot language, the tilt angle and range setting of our radar, which we selected due to the pandemic. And maybe there's also rocky terrain below us, which we are not noticing because we currently always look at the big thunderstorm clouds of COVID. So let's start with the overall situation and ability to travel due to the COVID restriction. I would have loved to tell you, okay, Europe is open, come see us. But we all know it's not the case like this. Give you a flavor of the overall situation. Traffic situation in Europe, and it's a bit different than the US. As of 5th of May, these are the last Eurocontrol figures I got. The overall traffic is at 35% of the respective 2019 equivalent week. Airlines, traditional airlines, minus 69%, down to even minus 85% for low-cost airlines, which gives you a really good picture, which is good for business aviation because our customers need us to travel around. But also business aviation is at minus 15% and dominated by turboprop to all classes of light jets, with a combined share of these being about 2/3 of the traffic. So heavy jets, even mid-size to super mid-size, are very low in traffic still because you can't do longer range missions. You're basically hopping between within the country or between a few countries currently. And we already heard it from our colleagues earlier. So Eurocontrol painted a traffic scenario with shows a slight increase over the summer to, let's say, about 45 to 55% of the 2019 traffic. So they are cautiously optimistic. Give you an overall picture, the rates of fully vaccinated people in most European countries are averaging around 12%. These are the figures of today, except we're talking countries like Israel, UK, Serbia, Hungary, and the little ones like Monaco and Malta. They have higher vaccination rates. But overall in Europe, vaccinations are slowly developing. We see a continuous decline in incidence rates. That's the COVID cases mostly counted per 100,000 capita throughout Europe. So there is definitely hope for increased opportunities for access as the summer approaches. But okay, and I don't want to give you a lecture in political science. A few facts are very important if you look at Europe, and I hope they help understanding people around the world how Europe works. There are up to 50 countries on the geographic European continent, depending on how you count it, because even Kazakhstan is partly in Europe, and if it's to the Ural Mountains. And the European Union only has 27 countries. So there is a highly fragmented regulation regarding health and safety, which can be expected. And we already see in the chats many questions refer to that. Now, even concerning the EU 27, you would expect matters to be regulated on a top-down basis, but it's not the case for health matters. Many areas of our lives in the European Union are regulated by EU law, but public health is left to the individual states. And that is one thing which is very important to understand here. And the same is indeed true for taxes. So I think there's a little link to what the European Commission does, but that leads me to the second block of the topics and to the circumstances under which we are operating right now. So in general, there is no uniform definition and application of a threshold incident rate, for example, which has correlation to any restrictions. So every country is doing their own regulation based on own definition of a threshold rate when freedom can be granted or when lockdowns will be established. Not even within the EU, and I must tell you, not even within a single country. Especially in Germany, we have very good examples where even the different federal states of Germany do different things. So that doesn't make plans any easier. But it's a good business for Universal and other trip support providers. So let's say on the EBAA, the European Business Aviation Association, from the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic, EBAA has been working closely with EASA and the European Center of Disease Control and other aviation associations to advocate a uniform and predictable approach to reduce and mitigate health risks in air travel. That's our goal, but we know as I just mentioned, that it's down to the states, and sometimes you cannot reach down to them and even to the different regions or federal states as they do their own thing. So for example, there is a joint EASA European Center of Disease Control document that was developed to support member states of the European Union for to come up with a coordinated approach. But of course, that's an appeal. None of them are actually implementing it to the full extent as it was established by, let's say, those people who know best how aviation works. And unfortunately, this is my own view now, the coronavirus pandemic brought us back to our smallest protective circles of literally homes, settlements, counties, and not all to our benefits, especially for our industry, because we enable connections across borders and large distances. To give you a reality check, example of a flight from Germany to Belgium, there are lots of restrictions, often not logical. And often it's also to the disadvantage of air travel versus land travel. And there was a question earlier, when I enter through France, entry is granted to France, can I move around freely within the Schengen area? I think there was already an answer. No, it's not the case, because not even the Schengen area has any meaning right now, because it's like from country to country, and each country defines its or categorizes other countries into certain risk areas, like we heard earlier from Christine. The UK now has a traffic light schemes, other have other schemes, and each country does its own thing. So you really have to take care of each leg of your trip within Europe once you had a chance to enter Europe. And example also from today, Austria and Germany. Yesterday, the heads of states of the federal state of Bavaria, bordering to Austria, and the German and the Austrian head of state announced that cross-border travel will start again. But today, travelers were sent back to Germany because the regulations hadn't been put in force yet. So things are sometimes announced, but effective dates will then lag. And I think that is one of the points where you really have to watch closely together with your trip support providers. And for passengers, and we heard it earlier, the famous electronic entry applications or passenger locator forms, also these, unfortunately, although we tried, also from an EBAA level, they had not been, countries and states did not harmonize them. So now you have to deal with all kinds of applications in different formats and forms. And a traveler who likes to move across Europe, even after entering Europe initially, and who wants to visit several countries, will then be confronted with a myriad of electronic solutions and entry forms. And I can't tell you something more nicely, sorry for that. And I think it was mentioned earlier too, maybe from Gonzalo. If you are a crew on a deadhead leg, I think it's also very important if you have a crew change and have to fly deadhead in or out, be sure that you be ready with all your documentation and all your testing like a passenger, like a normal passenger, because they will most, let's say, agents at a check-in counter may not know the special regulations for crews and may not give you these exemptions, which as an active crew you can rely on. Very important. Another word on the vaccination passes and other green passports for vaccinations. That has been promoted by the European Union, yes. But as Christine mentioned earlier, we have to expect that the implementation might be different from country to country again, unfortunately, because public health is not in EU law domain per se. So while, let's say, Germany and Austria, as well as some other countries, passed some laws to allow for larger freedoms for those who have been vaccinated, let's say 2 weeks after the last doses. There's a fresh example from this morning from the press. The French Parliament voted against a health pass to allow vaccinated people to regain many of the lost freedoms. So the discussions are ongoing in each country. And unfortunately, right now, on May 12th. You cannot count on having the same level of access and freedoms across Europe at the time of your travel. We hope this will be changing over time, but the example from the French Parliament this morning gave us that there is a different view in each country. Again, because of those health and safety restrictions and the economic factors like furloughs, we see reduced opening times, and it was mentioned earlier. Temporary closure of complete facilities and airfields. And for example, catering at some airports is difficult to get because some catering companies have closed their outlets there. So you have to work closely together with your trip support provider or a hotel wherever you stay. So the question, what will happen later this summer, is a very valid one. I would like to give you the answer. Everything is open. But I can only answer it with watch this channel closely. And this moves me then over to the last block, which is, I think, very important: the rocky terrain under the radar or under our radar beam, which may have been overshadowed by our look at COVID issues over the past weeks and months. Some Brexit fallouts, especially for commercial operators. I think it's important to know that there is no blanket permit for all European commercial operators to fly to the UK and the other way around. Like for UK commercial operators to fly anywhere to and within the EU. The UK will and has agreed with the different European Union states, with the other 27 states, on block permits, but only on a reciprocity basis. So it's very important when you're a commercial operator that you check with your national civil aviation authority if you're an EU operator. Another topic is, let's say, the importation of aircraft. Rarely do you really have to import an aircraft when you fly to Europe, because if you fly there as a private operator and it's not EU registered, you may enter the European Union for up to 6 months and you don't have to pay VAT or import duty tax. And the same is basically valid for the UK. This is a temporary admission which you can rely on. But if you really need to import an aircraft, it's important to know that if you have done that in the past, you have to make sure that you chose where you want to have it right now, because you can either have it in the UK or then you have to do something to actually also register in the European Union, but you don't get both registrations now at the same time. So I'm not a tax advisor, but I know there is something if you have to take a look at if you're involved in importation of aircraft. The US and EU tariff war, the Boeing Airbus, if you have heard about it, is currently stopped. It wasn't actually applicable to most traditional business aircraft because there was a weight threshold, which is not even met by the largest purpose-built business aircraft. But another point I think which is really important to know, which has not been on the radar, is the SAFA and SACA checks. Those dreaded ones. And now they include drug and alcohol tests. And I also have another link to share with you to give you some information about those ramp inspections to make you operational ready again for this if you haven't watched or taken a look at your checklist, internal checklist for that. Another one of these which comes up during the SAFA checks is sometimes the dreaded topic of MEL versus MMEL. There have been changes in the past years with the FAA. For those of you who had a D, I think it's a D095 letter of authorization, which makes you using the MMEL instead of the MEL. That is not valid in the European Union, and it used to be a point in the SAFA checks, and you have to apply for a D195. And I think, yes, FAA might still have a backlog in this. Just make sure you're aware of some challenges in that. The other thing is The PNR directive is essentially, if you go to Poland, there's a good IBAC paper on that because the passenger name record, especially for commercial operations, it's something which is also a EU directive. So each state has a different interpretation, which is a great thing, isn't it? But there's a good paper published by IBAC on that. So lastly, to wrap it up, I want to promote the use of sustainable aviation fuel in Europe and around the world. And as EBAA, we want to do that. And this will be one of the next hot topics because we want to reduce carbon emissions through air operations. In Europe, especially, we say this is the future license to operate. If you want to need more about, if you want to have more information about that, there's this website, there's the link, which will be shared with you. But most importantly, when you fly to Europe, make your FBO known that you request SAF in the future, because we want to have more FBOs to be ordering SAF, not immediately, but in the mid to long term. And if you go to Paris, Nice, Barcelona, Madrid, Malaga, wherever, Milano, Roma, Athens, make them know, hey, next time I come, I want to have SAF. So we want to spread the use of and the deliveries of sustainable aviation fuel. So to summarize everything, I wish you all being able to come back to fly to and within Europe soon. Work closely with your trip support provider. Be ready for changes on short notice, unfortunately, still over the summer. And I wish you all blue skies, summer skies, and fly safely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juergen, and I hope that we can have you back again, maybe in a few months for an update to see what has transpired.
More positive one.
Exactly. So we're going to move now into questions. If you saw in the chat, and hopefully you've been keeping up because there's been a lot of valuable information going through the chat, both the links that Juergen was mentioning, other links to information, as well as where everyone's been putting their questions in. And we're about to get into some of those pre-submitted, thank you, and the questions that are here. So I gave you a time update. We do expect to go to at least 15 minutes after to get as many of these questions in. We'll go speed round with them. But also, just as a note, there's a lot of valuable info in that chat right now. So if you're unfamiliar, there is an ellipsis of the three dots at the bottom right-hand corner of your chat window. And if you click that, you should have an option to save the chat information off as a file. So please take a look for that, and we will get into our questions right now. If you haven't put in your questions, do so immediately so we can try to get to them. Again, a recording is going to be posted tomorrow of this full session, the link to it in our weekly COVID Ops email. So Christine, we're going to get started with you. Any gauge on travel ban lifting in the UK and London for Ops in June?
Well, I guess first things first is they've just issued the guidance that's going to go into effect on May 17th. And as such, they categorize things now in that coordinated either green, amber, or red. Currently, the US is in the amber status. That means that the current process to enter the country remains the same. They will review it again on May 28th. Hopefully, the US will pass and get onto the green list, but we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. As far as operations to London in general, of course, we have the G7 that's going to be happening in the UK. So that's going to bring in more traffic. So operators in the EMEA region are going to have to consider that. Also, depending on where you're going in London, things may change. One note that we had just published recently was Northolt. Northolt used to be Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. They've now increased their operational hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., which is great for people that are looking to get out there. It's the closest to Heathrow, and of course, that makes it easier for people coming in or leaving commercially. And then they will be extending weekend operating hours for certain high traffic events. So you may look at that if you're going into that area. Hopefully, we can extend that more even further down the line.
Excellent. Thanks, Christine. All right, Adam, any insight when the U.S. plans to lift the ban on foreign nationals or news on the U.S.-UK travel corridor? I know Christine just touched on this a bit, but from your perspective, any other insights?
Well, presidential proclamations, all we've done is add since the last time we met. So no, I don't get the sense that we're going to going to be reversing course in the short term. But like I said, the stuff for the U.S. is around allowing some flexibility in that access or an approval process. So we're seeing kind of a shift to that. So instead of a full ban, a vetted access. But I think we're a little ways away from dropping presidential proclamations in total. And of course, when it comes to transatlantic gateways and stuff, obviously that's a bilateral discussion between the US and the UK. We're seeing where the US falls in the UK scale. UK is a suspended country for us, so we would certainly need to find some middle ground between what is right now we're mutually suspending each other. So that doesn't lead me to think that there's going to be a major change, tomorrow, but I know it's something both countries are interested in.
All right, thank you. So Christine, we're back to you. Any gauge on when Australia will allow Australian citizens to return without the 14-day hotel quarantine requirement?
Currently, everything remains the same. They haven't given us any guidance or any insight as to when that may change. So we're just going to have to monitor things closely.
All right, so keeping an eye on that. Also, back to the EU, but it's specifically around the scenario of pilots who are vaccinated, passengers who are not vaccinated, but do have negative PCR tests. I'm assuming, again, it's back to what each region mandates.
Correct. Of course, each region is going to be mandating what is permitted and not. As Dimitra said earlier, crew are exempt from requirements, but you have some of those outlying locations that do want you to potentially get that PCR testing because of concern. So if the pilots are not vaccinated, go ahead and get that done if you can. It'll just kind of ease things, because if they enact regulation that states that if you're not vaccinated, you would need to be quarantined at your hotel for a length of stay. That's just not fun. And as far as passengers, what I'm saying, if they follow the digital green pass throughout the EU, if they are not vaccinated, then they will have to get a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival, which is what I'm seeing consistently.
All right, thank you. Adam, we're back. So we got a comment and a question. Houston, so KHOU, keeps being an issue for foreign pilots not having a C1D on private 91 flights. What's the status on clarifying this further with USCBP?
So we've worked through this, and I think CBP in the latest exemptions that have come out from State Department, I mean, they've tried to be very clear on who those exempted parties are and which visas are valid for it. But a C1, a commercial operator, somebody flying a for-hire flight, needs a C1D visa to come to the United States. A private non-revenue crew needs a B1, B2. If there's a question about that on an arrival, then we can direct that back to a supervisor or watch command at that level or at that port. But that's not a common misconception that we're seeing kind of across the system, if that makes sense.
Got it. All right, thanks for that. Christine, when do you think traveling to Scotland with no quarantine, if you are vaccinated, will be permitted? Again, look into the future.
That's going to fall under the purview with the UK, the HMRC. Once they look at things and they see when it's safe and they move the US from an amber to a green, then of course that would remove those quarantine requirements. Now, one thing I also wanted to mention is that some very few, and I mean this, very few exemptions are permitted for the UK. We've seen some examples of persons that are in the business of frozen foods that would be given exemption to come into the UK and omit the quarantine. But things like normal essential business in the financial realm, for example, would not be permitted. So if it's something very specified that affects the country financially, then that could be that entry for quarantine-free entry.
Got it. All right, well, we continue then on the European theme. So there's a request for more info on current restrictions for US passengers going into London, Berlin, and Paris.
So for London, I just touched on that. As far as Berlin, Germany is still quite restricted. They are permitting essential travel into the country. You will have to complete a document issued by the German police. They will review that and advise you if it is permitted for entry. So that's an option, but you have to specify it. If not, we just have to wait for the EU Digital Green Pass to be approved and to see what Germany does. As far as France is concerned, currently they are easing requirements throughout the country over the next few weeks. And they did advise that US tourists would be permitted into France as of June 9th. So we're going to have to see if that date moves or not, but it will likely require the vaccination certificate with 2 weeks since the last dose and a 72-hour PCR test prior to arrival.
Got it. And you obviously just mentioned France and Germany. Italy, the next question is related to requirements for Italy for passengers.
Don't know if Andrea wants to take that, or I can.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so currently it is restricted. Essential business is permitted currently up to 120 hours max. Of course, you have to furnish that proof, and we would have to make sure it's approved from local authorities. They are expecting that later this week, at the latest Monday, we're going to get those new guidelines for entry into Italy. They are following what Greece is stating, that you either have to have vaccination, that 2 weeks have passed since the last dose, or a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival. And that should be going into place in the next week or so. Also, I know the question was asked as far as Italy is concerned for passengers under the age of 2. For children, they can be exempt from PCR testing because, of course, children are not able to get vaccinated, but any child over the age of 2 for Italy will need to get a PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival.
All right, thanks. And so next question already asked the same for Italy and France, which you've covered. They mentioned a trip coming up to the Canary Islands as well. Any other special info?
Gonzalo, you want to take that, or you want me to get it?
I will assist. Well, as I said, Canary Islands a little bit more special. All passengers require PCR test, and crews are no longer exempt of PCR tests when overnight at the Canary Islands, especially if they're staying at the hotel. When they're staying at the apartment, there might be, depending on the island, certain restrictions, as normally this is done by the tourist government. But regularly to the Canary Islands, all crew members and passengers require a PCR test performed in the last 72 hours.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right. So, Christine, I think we mentioned you were going to take this one. Have standard benchmarks for entry from individual countries been established? Wouldn't we all like that to be the case?
So every country is, of course, looking at their own guidelines as far as what they consider high numbers of COVID per capita versus their own. Of course, it has to do with their healthcare. Some islands obviously have fewer options in persons of need. So they are establishing those requirements and coming out with clear guidelines. In many cases, we're seeing the vaccination certificate will get you in. Those smaller locations will likely also require a PCR test prior to arrival and/or arrival. So that's still going to be something that people are going to need to do. Unfortunately, things are going to be changing. Larger regions like the EU is going to have those general guidelines, like the digital green pass, when it comes into play. But for other locations, we're just going to have to, it's more of a moving target.
Excellent. And then shifting gears to South America, Chile apparently still has quite a few restrictions in place if passengers obtain the necessary visas, if they can. Are corporate aircraft getting into and out of Chile?
Right now, even if you're able to get a visa, you're not going to be able to get in. They're doing humanitarian, cargo, and for some medical flights, like emergency flights. If you're looking to travel to Chile with passengers, the only way to currently get in is to seek diplomatic approval through the embassy. The passengers will need to do that and necessitate the purpose of the flight and why it's urgent. And then from there, if that approval comes through, then entry into the country would be possible.
It. Thanks, Christine. And then Adam, this is our last of the pre-submitted questions, and we're going to go to Lewis, so you can be ready to go. So Lewis, Adam, not Lewis. We've heard before, this is from the operator, that there's no need to present a Gen Deck for a Part 91 flight. However, we've had numerous inspectors in Teterboro asking for this document back to CBP clarification. So additionally, back to a very popular topic, inspectors asking for negative COVID test results, which was not supposed to be the case. Can you clarify anything further?
Yeah, if you're still getting the COVID questions, we get them very rarely still when we're trying to set up landing rights. it's just depending on what the officer is asking, is how far we'll pursue it. The other question was a little bit more interesting. I don't think that the COVID issue with CBP or testing issue is something more than an inconvenience. The issue around the Gendex, though, can be more of a problem. I think this private aircraft arrival guidance document is going to be, it addresses documentation. It addresses documentation outside of private APIS. So the function here is to not push people, but leverage US APIS as the system that brings all that information to CBP, allows them to review it, and then provide back a systematic approval. So all these additional documents, Gendex being faxed in and handed to them and all these different things, you're going to see those start to go away as we bring single syntax in. And so people aren't filing different APIS. You don't have different documentation for different flights, and it really brings GA closer together. So still something that officers are doing. They do have a little bit of latitude to ask for specific landing rights protocols or procedures, but CBP is, as a headquarter and as a national process, are trying to flush those out. So certainly report it if you're getting something that you think is not in line with that private arrival document. You can ask to escalate it to a supervisor. I'd love to help you out with it, or escalate it to headquarters.
All right, thank you, Adam. So we have, by the estimate of trying to wrap up at 1:15 Central, we have about a little less than 5 minutes. So Lewis, your turn.
Yeah, so let's see if we can rapid fire a few of these. Christine, can you give us a quick update on St. Martin?
For St. Martin, it depends on the nationality. Normally it says 72 hours prior to arrival. For US nationals, both crew and passengers, it's 120 hours prior to arrival to get that PCR test. And yes, it's applicable to crew too. You also have to complete the online form. That's where you're going to upload those PCR tests. And during the process, you're going to have to get medical coverage on that platform. This is applicable to passengers. Crew are exempt from the medical coverage itself, but crew will have to complete that online form too. Also, in lieu of a PCR test, they can get an antigen test 48 hours prior to arrival.
Thanks. Any specific information on Split, Croatia, and Tavat, Montenegro?
I think Andrea mentioned it. As far as Croatia, Croatia is open to US nationals that are vaccinated. 2 weeks have had to have passed since their last dose. They will have to have a confirmed accommodation in country, either at a hotel or the rental of a vessel. And Montenegro, I think it's open for US vaccinated persons too. And a PCR test, I think, is needed. I don't know if
That's correct. That's correct, yes.
Great. And what are the requirements for Geneva?
So for Switzerland, it's a bit different. Originally, you could get in for essential business if you provided the letter and it was pre-approved by local authorities. They have taken it a step further that if it is for essential business, you're going to have to go through the diplomatic channel, submit that documentation to your local embassy. And if it's approved, then US persons can go in. Now, you have to look at what they call the FOPH list. This is all depending on the COVID cases worldwide, and countries and or regions are added or removed from that list. If the US is not on the list, last I checked, it wasn't, then if they have the approval, they can be quarantine free along with their PCR test. But it all depends on when they go.
Thanks. Quick question, clarification for Juergen. Juergen, when you were talking earlier about commercial traffic in the UK, did you mean charter?
Correct. Yeah.
Great. Time for maybe one more. We'll jump in. Let's see. Generally speaking, are countries in Europe treating vaccinated versus unvaccinated crew differently, or are crew exemptions the same for both? Anybody want to take that?
I think it's really going to depend by the country. They are going to take the general guidelines issued and modify them. Dimitra did mention, and so did Gonzalo, that for those outlying locations like the Canary Islands, like the smaller islands, may require that PCR test. Best practice is to go ahead and, as far as crewing, get vaccinated, because if those regulations change, then they may be quarantined in their hotel for length of stay.
Thanks, Christine. I think at this point we're going to stop, and we have a record of all the questions that were not answered, so we will reach out to you one-on-one.
Exactly, because I know that we've gone now an hour 15, and thank you so many of you for staying with us. It's been awesome as always, and we will get back to you on the questions we didn't get to. Thanks again for sending the ones that were in advance. It helps us prepare. So again, we'll be joining you, hopefully. I hope you can join us, I guess I should say, in June for our next installment. Unless there's some really important breaking news, then we will jump in a few weeks before that. A pleasure having you all. And I want to especially thank our incredible panel today, Gonzalo, Dimitra, Andrea from our UA locations in Europe, Juergen with the European Business Aviation Association, and of course, as always, my stalwarts experts, Adam and Christine, that help me carry this program through each and every month. So a pleasure to have all of you. And needless to say, any ideas you have for future programming, any topics you want to hear about, please send us an email at operationalinsight@univway.com. You can reach out to us, and that way I can include it in our upcoming events. Really look forward to seeing you again in June and hearing more about the travels that are taking place. So good luck with that. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.